Hi there. Do you have a great idea for a fiction story? A story you're dying to bring to the world, but you don't know where you're going with it, don't know how to fill out a compelling plot, and have a hard time sitting down to even write words, much less finish your story? Even when you do write, do you worry that it's boring, that it drags, and that readers are going to hate it? So you stay stuck, write and rewrite the same scenes, and eventually give up, ending up with a file of half-written manuscripts and glorious story ideas on your computer. Hi, my name is Liesl, USA Today best-selling author and writer of 4 genres, and I've been writing fiction for more than 15 years. I teach fiction authors to write highly emotional stories based on elements of psychology and spirituality, with an emphasis on your unique subconscious creativity. Did you know that human beings cannot be emotionally healthy without stories? That we'd all literally go mad if we couldn't tell ourselves stories and derive meaning from them? It's true, and a scientifically proven fact. So, grab your chocolate of choice and your fuzzy slippers. Let's turn that story snippet knocking around in your brain into a full-length novel that will give your reader that emotionally cathartic experience they long for, make you money, and change the world. Who's with me? Hey everybody, Liesl here. I am going to be doing a breakdown using my 10 plot points, universal plot points, of the 1999 film The Mummy. The Mummy was always one of my very favorites from the first time I saw it. It was just fun. It was just pure escapism, and I loved it. And I still watch it from time to time, not super often, but it's still one of my favorite stories, right? So let's just get right into it and show you how the 10 plot points play out here. So first we have the world before. Remember that the world before is the baseline at the start of the story, right? So we have 1926 Cairo, Evelyn shelving books in a dusty museum, yearning to prove herself as a real scholar. Rick rots in a desert prison, a rootless Legion veteran, and life is humdrum or hopeless but stable. The city of the dead is only a legend. So this is where we're starting, right? Baseline of the story before all the adventure and call to action kicks off, right? Then we have the intro of conflict. Jonathan steals a puzzle box or key and map to Hamunaptra. This new information excites Evelyn, but doesn't yet upend anyone's life. So once again, the intro is usually where they learn something, they get information, the concept of what the conflict is going to be comes into their world, but they're not really taking action on it yet. Then we have the call to adventure. This is the thing that actually does kick them into the adventure. It does cause them to take action, and very often it completely upends their world. So to reach Hamunaptra, Evelyn bargains Rick out of the gallows so that he can guide their expedition, and every principal character boards the Nile steamer, leaving normal life behind. So in this case, it doesn't have to be the case in all stories, though it more often is either in fantasy or in action adventure. They're actually going somewhere. They're actually going on a quest, which means physically traveling somewhere in the story. Now, again, not all stories are like that, but this one definitely is. So in the early story escalation, remember that they're very much being reactive. Things are happening and they tend to run, hide, jump, gasp a lot. There's things acting upon them and they are simply reacting to those things, trying to keep their heads above water. So for the early story escalations in The Mummy, we have the competing American treasure hunters and the Magi warnings, a nighttime boat attack, ravenous scarabs, and the discovery of both canopic jars and the Book of the Dead. All outside forces batter the heroes while they mostly react. So, I always say that there are multiple escalations. All of these are different different events that happened in the plot. And you're not going to have just one escalation probably. So this is a good example of that. If I were to pick one, so when I'm having when I'm teaching authors to plan out their stories, use these 10 plot points as a skeleton for their story. I always say pick the one that most closely adheres to the rules of the early story escalation, or that in the biggest way is going to turn the story. So for this one in The Mummy, I would say it's probably the boat attack. Okay, this is like the first time that everything's going well. They're on the boat, they're just ho-humming along and things are going pretty well. And then they get attacked and they have no idea where this is coming from. They don't know who these people are, and they're very much reacting. They're fighting, they're jumping off a boat, trying to stay alive, right? And very much they are just reacting. And, they jump in the river, so maybe literally trying to keep their heads above water, as it were. And this really is quite the wrinkle in their plan and in their journey toward Hamunaptra. So I would say that's probably the biggest escalation and the one that I would go with if I was only picking one, but all of these things that I've listed here do count as story escalations. All right, then we have the turning point. Remember, the turning point is where they stop being reactive. They decide they've had enough of that and they want to be proactive in achieving their story goals. They very often hatch a plan for how they're going to do that. So Evelyn reads an incantation aloud, accidentally resurrecting Emotep. From this moment, the team shifts from treasure seekers to proactive monster stoppers. Survival, not riches, becomes the goal. So the other thing about the turning point is that it's where everything kind of changes. Like the first half of the story up to the turning point, they often have one goal or the way that things are happening in the story are happening a certain way. Then when you hit the turning point, everything changes. Sometimes their goal changes. Sometimes it's just, okay, first we were doing this, now we're doing that. And so this is kind of what this turning point is. It changes their goals, but also up to this point, they were heading toward Hamunaptra, but Emotep was not out and kicking, right? He was still very much trapped in his sarcophagus. But when she reads, that resurrects him. And so now for the rest of the story, they are actually doing battle with an undead supernatural creature from ancient Egypt, which the first half of the story, that was not the case. So you can see why that's going to end up being the turning point. All right, then we have the late story escalation. Emotep drains the Americans' organs, unleashes biblical plagues on Cairo, hypnotizes mobs, and kidnaps Evelyn for his ritual. Stakes skyrocket, and their earlier plan is shattered. So again, lots of different stuff, but remember that the late story escalation means outside forces are pushing back. And obviously, most of this is coming from the villain, it's coming from Emotep, all of these things. I would say the biggest one here is probably Evelyn getting kidnapped because she means something emotionally to Rick. That's going to be the biggest deal for him. Of course, it's very tragic that a lot of the Americans archaeologist gets killed, but at the same time, they were always side characters and they were not always terribly likable. So basically, we don't care about them, and that's mostly because Rick doesn't really care about them. So yeah, once again, we can see a lot of different possible escalations, but the biggest one, the one that has the most emotional bearing, is the one that I would usually focus on for the late story escalation. All right, the climactic moment is always going to be the main character, or characters in this case, against the villain, right? Against coming face to face with their biggest nemesis in the story. Back in Hamunaptra's temple, Rick sword fights mummified priests while Evelyn stalls Emotep and Jonathan scrambles to unlock the golden book of Amun-Ra. The heroes can confront their supreme antagonist together. So this is just the whole end sequence. There's a lot of action going on where they're, Emotep is trying to sacrifice Evelyn. You've got Rick and Jonathan running around. More mummies keep showing up to fight them, and Jonathan eventually takes control of them. There's just a lot going on. It's this whole sequence is, of course, the climactic face-off. The Uber Despair, kind of like Dark Night of the Soul, is where they often don't think that they're going to be able to pull it off, like the bad guy's going to win and they are not. So for this, Emotep begins reviving Anaxuna Moon. Rick's weapons bounce off the immortal priest. The temple is collapsing. And Evelyn is seconds from death. It appears they have already lost, or that they're going to lose, right? But then the aha is where they figure out that they can do this, or how they're going to be able to do this, right? Jonathan deciphers the final hieroglyph, which reading it strips Emotep of immortality. Rick instantly pivots, runs him through, and hurls him into the soul-draining pool. Knowledge plus courage equals victory. And of course, the resolution is that Hamunaptra sinks beneath the sand. Benny and his camel load of gold vanishes. Rick, Evelyn, and Jonathan ride into the sunset, richer, alive, and at least for Rick and Evelyn, in love. So I want you to notice this is the first mention of Benny we have in the 10 plot points. And that's because he's not a major character, right? The 10 plot points are usually focused on the main storyline, and it's just a skeletal structure so that you make sure that you're hitting all of the right points. But of course, you have to go in and fill in the details. And Benny is he's actually one of my favorite characters. He's so funny, and I crack up every time he's on screen because he's a bad guy, but he's also a wuss. And so he's like the biggest coward, and he says the most hysterical things. But he's not mentioned here, right? Until the very end. He's kind of a footnote. So just something to keep in mind, that the 10 plot points are here to help you structure your story, but it is not the end all be all of your story. You got to fill in the details. You got to fill in the subplots. You got to come up with the characters that have either the weirdness or the awkwardness or the levity of Benny, right? And all the other characters. There's a lot of dry humor in this story, which is one of the reasons I always really liked it. A few other things, takeaways. Even though this is a globe-trotting, effects-heavy adventure, it still hits these same 10 universal plot points, which is why I call them that. All stories need these 10 plot points. There are different structures of plot points, different systems of them, but I'm telling you, all of them are some sort of play on these 10. Some have more plot points, some have less, but it really all boils down to needing these points, right? And in this case, each beat turns the story. Plot point 5, the turning point, isn't just a cool scare. It's the structural hinge that flips the heroes from treasure hunters to world savers. So let's go back and look at this again. I did talk about it a lot when I first read it, but remember that this is where she reads the incantation and resurrects Emotep. So this is a huge hinge. And I think that that's really important for some stories. I always, if you listen to my podcast or you are in the membership with us, I gripe on this a lot. I get on my soapbox about this a lot. The turning point is a huge, huge part of the story. It's a huge beat. It's like, I love that it, to describe it that way, it is the hinge on which the second half of the story turns. And most people don't even know what the turning point is. They don't include it. They might include it in a very, very general way as part of act 2 of 3 or something, but they're not doing it intentionally. They don't really know what it is. They don't even realize whether they are or aren't doing it. So please pay attention to the turning point. It's really important. Okay. So I hope you guys enjoyed that breakdown of The Mummy. I give you permission to go rewatch it if you haven't watched it in a while. I did in order to do this breakdown, and of course I had fun. If you want a little bit more, if you are at all interested in the 12 internal plot points for the characters, or other small lessons we can take away from the story, please feel free to join us inside the Legendary Fiction Forge. In this case, I actually did the 10 plot points internally for Rick, Evelyn, and Emotep because they are all there. And I think that's part of what makes the story so great, is that the internal characterization is there very strongly for all of the main characters. And that's not always the case in action adventure movies, but they make the best action adventure movies or stories of any kind because it's there. So if you want to learn what that is, I will include that in this month's lesson inside the Forge. The link to sign up is in the show notes. Inside the Forge, you also get 2 Q&As with me every month where you can ask me anything to help you with your writing. We also have other authors in there you can bounce ideas off of, and I've got some more free training on pacing and that sort of thing. So feel free to join us anytime you would like. We would love to have you and to hear what wonderful genius stories you are currently working on in your writing. All right, you guys, we will see you in the next deconstruction. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for listening today. If this episode helped or inspired you in any way, would you do me a solid and leave me a review? Reviews help other fiction authors find the podcast. You could also recommend it to a writer friend of yours so they can get the same inspiration you got. Remember, you have a story inside you that only you can tell. So get out there and write your soul story, because your readers are waiting for it with bated breath.